amid growing concerns about economic growth.
Consumer spending was
As
soft.
expected, cut interest rates another quarter point.
We are following breaking news. All three major American stock markets have closed down.
Bitcoin rose 10%.
Even gave the stock market a temporary second wind.
The market reaction, it was kind of nonplussed.
Tariffs going into effect tomorrow.
But the NASDAQ was also.
Investors will be watching closely for more clues about the direction.
It's time to tune out the noise and tune in to great information with a steward's view. Expect valuable economic updates, investing techniques, and planning concepts that move you to be wise and decide well. You'll be equipped and encouraged in a stewardship mindset, managing God's resources 1 week at a time. You can listen to this podcast and previous episodes at astewardsview.com.
Welcome back. I'm Aaron Kolkman, that's Chaz Louder, and our special guest today is Paul Larsen. This is The Steward's View. So glad you joined us again. Remember to visit this and previous episodes online at astewardsview.com or on your favorite podcast platform. Listen, like, follow, and share ASV. And this summer, ASV moves to videocast. That's June 2025. ASV Plus also becomes available for institutions. And another bonus this summer, get the Life Cycle of Wealth book refresh online at astewardsview.com and major booksellers nationally. Today, we're going to bypass some of the economic and market readout, and we'll perhaps continue that way when Paul Larsen is with us. He has some unique thoughts that he brings to our program. In fact, so far, the most listened to program that we have is the one that Paul was on with us here a little over a month ago. And so I want to make special mention that Paul is creating time to join us and to go through things that he has worked on over a number of years that relate to how we do life as stewards, not just how we invest or how we engage with the economy, okay? Not even how we make financial plans, but it does relate to those things. He's giving some context, some day-to-day thoughts about living in purpose that we can add to the economic, investment, and financial planning conversation. So with that, Paul, welcome back.
Well, thanks. Thanks, Aaron. Thanks for the opportunity.
It sounds to me like you've put, our listeners can't see what I can see yet, but I can say this, it looks like there's a lot that you've put together to talk about. So I'd just like to ask you, what is on your mind today?
Well, last time we were together, you asked the question, what kinds of stewardship come to mind when we talk about biblical stewardship? And I kind of turned the answer around. I turned the question around on it because the point is every grown-up is a steward, okay? You might be a good or a poor steward. You might be an accidental steward, or you might be an intentional steward, but you are a steward because a steward is managing the resources of somebody else. And the resources we have might include money. It might include our job, our skills. It certainly includes our time and our relationships. So stewardship, we won't want to limit it to how much money you give to church. And we don't want to, but because it's an economic issue as well. And we don't want to limit it to economic or money issues because it's much bigger than that. The Bible starts out with in the book of Genesis, very first chapter, the very first thing he says to man after creating man. In Genesis 1:28, he says, "Be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, and take dominion or rule over all of creation." Theologians call it a cultural mandate or a creation mandate. The point is, all the raw material of creation was there, and God said, make more. So he wants us engaged in flourishing and evidenting, creating an Eden around the whole world. So that's where the Bible starts. It doesn't start with a command to behave. It doesn't start with a command to bow down and worship me. It starts with a command to get to work. And so work is a big part of stewardship. And I would say, we didn't talk about this last time, but evangelism will end when the kingdom is here. Work won't. You realize that. Work is not part of the curse. It's the thorns and thistles that are part of the curse. Revelation 22 says, no longer will there be any curse. but that doesn't say there no longer be any work. So Adam was put in the garden to work the land. And so working means using our mind and our back and our skills to leverage creation into being more robust and flourishing. One of the things that I've been reminded of lately, because of some studies I'm teaching, is human beings have some fundamental questions. Now, this is after they get enough food to eat and after they've found a place to sleep. But when they ever have any kind of time on their hands, they'll wonder things like, who am I? How did I get here? Why am I here? And what's wrong with this place? Would you agree?
Absolutely. And we end up with, this is the short version from Aaron, we end up with a lot of confusion.
Yeah, well, all those questions can be answered with Scripture. And I don't mean discussions about whether the Bible, or the earth was created in 6 24-hour days or not. That's not what Genesis was written about. Genesis was written less about the how and more about the why and the who when it comes to why we're here. Who made us? Okay? So, and with the way how that connects to stewardship is, we're given bodies, we're given knowledge, we're given time. How do we manage that? Because these are all gifts of God. So what I try to do at the most foundational level is help Christians realize, going back to money here, that money is neither a good or bad thing. It's just a tool that can be used in the right way or in a desperately wrong way. I also try to help Christians replace the motivations of fear, greed, envy, and even false guilt, which are pagan. These are pagan motivations, and replace those with the fruits of the Spirit: love, joy, peace, patience, hope, etc. So how would you apply the fruits of the Spirit to financial stewardship or vocational stewardship?
Paul, I hear a lot about purpose. I hear a lot about mission in what you're saying. And without repeating, lines out of books about this that are alluding to the same basic concepts of who we are and what we're here for, I'd like you to kind of spell that out for those in relation to work, in relation to purpose. For those who are listening, what is it about these things you'd have us stay with after this session is ended?
Well, maybe the biggest takeaway is to quiz yourself about how your work, how you spend your time, your efforts, your loves, your affections, how do they reflect the fruits of the Spirit in your life? And so when it comes to things like work, it may be hard to be able to define your work in terms of the kingdom. Have you ever thought about that? How would you define your work in terms of the kingdom?
That there's a lot assumed in that question. I'll answer it, and that is to serve along the lines of, in Aaron Kolkman's mind, Colossians 3:23, which instructs us to serve our Heavenly Father, King Jesus, whatever language you want to apply to the triune God and who that is, but in our relationship to Him to serve according to what He has for us to do. So what I do is facilitate conversations. That's my 8 to 5 about purposeful decision making. And, I'm going to fall short, but I understand that to be my mission. And so I'm answering your question, but also pointing out, Paul, that hopefully in a fruitful way, your question requires us to know something about who the triune God actually is, and in relation to us, even as Christians. Easy to misunderstand. and to be confused and to be distracted. And so it's difficult. A few years ago, I'll say 5+ years ago, I'm not sure I could have answered that question as succinctly. And I've been in the line of work I'm in now for over 20. So it's difficult, isn't it? And this is an equipping program. You're offering great equipment. I'm really listening for perhaps what some of our listeners are wanting, and that is understanding this stuff. Okay, this is where I've read the books about purpose. What is my purpose? How do I find it? What do I do to discover it? Right, those things. And so I'm interested in your thoughts on those things, if you have more.
Well, there's no end to the books and courses and seminars and webcasts and webinars about finding your purpose. And I think that one of the reasons is because that is such a fundamental question we have. We want to be confident in that. And but when you think about it, you've spent your most formative years training for and the best hours of your week doing your vocation. Okay? So to what extent, and what does that reflect about the kingdom? And how does that increase the kingdom in your heart and in the minds and hearts of others? I'm not going to give you answers to that. I'm going to ask you to think in terms of those those categories. A physician can say, well, I'm here to heal, right? An attorney might say, well, I'm here to advocate for people's rights. What does a Starbucks employee say, right? Well, many of them are working part-time to try to get through school to do what their real job is. But how would a Christian who works at a Starbucks answer the question about their vocation? How does it advance the kingdom? And they could answer it by saying something like, well, I help provide an environment for people to study and to get to know each other and to observe culture. And if I could provide an environment that doesn't make that too complicated and makes it very comfortable, that could truly advance the kingdom. And the relationships that are created among clients can be even evangelistic, although they don't have to be. We are playing a role. We are stewarding our time in whatever we're doing. I mentioned we want to help replace the motivations of fear and greed and envy and replace them with the fruits of the Spirit. And of course, along with that is helping Christians come with some practical aspects of financial planning and so on. But most importantly, I think Christians need to understand for themselves that as stewards, you're not just making decisions regarding a return on investment, a way to the top of the corporate ladder, or a comfortable retirement. You're making decisions that affect our brothers, our neighbors, and our society. So to what extent can we look through kingdom eyes in the ways that we occupy all of our time?
Kingdom eyes. Those are big words to clarify kingdom thinking. My understanding, Paul, is, I've heard you say, I'll quote you to clarify my own understanding of what kingdom minding or a kingdom mindset is, and that's understanding our purpose, knowing our God, those things for sure, but then considering throughout the day, am I aligning my thoughts and my actions with my purpose or my mission while I'm here? So you've made a comment to me that the kingdom is inaugurated but not consummated. You've made that comment a lot, actually. And when I mention the confusion that comes into pursuing our own missions, the things that God would have for us to do while we're here, before we get home, before we actually get to experience, to see the kingdom firsthand. I point out the confusion for a reason, and that is that the kingdom isn't consummated. Faith and sight are different, right? So right now we just have to have faith that there is one. We're headed there, or can be. And in the meantime, we need to make the most of this in very specific ways. So something about how to not get so confused without, reading all of the book of Ephesians in one sitting. I can't emphasize this enough. And it comes let me tell you why I bring this up. Because I love the work that I've been called to. I know that there is a big difference between life goals and financial goals. Okay? The job in my mind of good financial planning, or the role of good financial planning, is to attach numbers to whatever the life path is. Okay? So that's different than saying, well, my set of goals is to educate my kids and retire at a certain age and leave X amount of money to my beneficiaries. Okay, those are financial things. They're valuable things. They're measurable things, as you pointed out. But they're different than saying, I want to see my kids thrive. I want to see my grandkids thrive. I see my work changing in the future, and here's the things that I see myself doing more of or differently. And when I get home to heaven, when I have sight or experience in the kingdom, the full thing, then, I want to be able to hear, well done, good and faithful servant, right? And I had a former business partner that talked that way. I so appreciated that. But my question to you is, when I'm sitting sometimes for hours in a meeting just to get to what life goals actually are, not to just dice apart numbers and, construct something measurable. Okay. The level of confusion is very high. Mm-hmm. And I understand, and I have a heart for that chaos that we have to walk through in this life. I know you do. If you have, thoughts about how that can be a little bit simpler, a little less chaotic, a little less confusing, that's, I know, something that will be a help to our listeners. If you don't, hey, that's okay too.
Well, you're absolutely right in saying that financial goals can be measured. We have this thing called a dollar, and we can measure the value of things and whether values have grown or shrunk. And so, yeah, that's kind of the easy one, right? But these other life goals, what you hope for people, where your affections are rooted, very hard to put numbers on them. And so this is where faith comes in. Faith is the evidence of things not seen and the substance of things hoped for, right? Maybe I got that twisted. But the point is, we don't see it, but we know it. Okay? We know it's out there. Now, you asked the question about the kingdom being inaugurated but not consummated. Well, Jesus himself said in first chapter Mark, he said the gospel was that the promised kingdom is here. And he pointed to himself. The kingdom's here. It's inaugurated. Okay? But it hasn't consummated. That is, it isn't everywhere. Okay? It's kind of like after World War II, the Allies invaded Normandy. Well, that turned the tide. but they still had to occupy. They had to go back and occupy all of France and all of Germany. The war wasn't over, but it had turned. Okay, so there's the inauguration, and then there's the occupation. Now, when Jesus asked Peter, "Who do you think I am?" Peter said, "Well, you're the Christ. You're the Messiah." And he asked him again, and he asked him again. Well, and then he said, "On that testimony, I build my ecclesia." He didn't actually say the word church, but he said, that's where I'm going to build my church, on that testimony. And what else did he say? The gates of hell will not prevail against it. Now, gates are defensive, right?
Mm-hmm.
Gates are not missiles and guns and grenades. They're defensive. So what does it mean that the gates of hell won't prevail against the growth of the church? It means that the gates can't keep the church out. Okay? In a very real way, this is Satan's world. This is the enemy's world. And the gospel and the kingdom is occupying it. And the more and more ground it takes, the more panicky the enemy is. So in thinking in those terms, when thinking about the kingdom, one way to think about the kingdom is to think about seeing where it's prevailing against the gates of hell and realizing it's an ongoing battle until the kingdom permeates all of these corners and all of these pockets where Satan still rules. When Satan's reign is ended, that's when the kingdom is consummated. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
So as we think about kingdom stuff, it's not just how many people do we recruit to come to our church. It's in what way is the kingdom growing? And I would say with things like work, stewardship, that type of thing, what was God's initial work? He made order out of the chaos.
Mm-hmm.
In a very real world, that's where we're at. Sometime we'll talk about the Puritans and the mindset they brought to the new world that was so valuable. Because that thinking in terms of improving things, making order out of the chaos is hugely kingdom work. Because our enemy exists for three reasons: to steal, to kill, and destroy.
And he succeeds with confusion, yes?
Confusion is a big way to steal, kill, and destroy. So we're to make order out of the chaos, to make things better, to make that car run a little better or a little longer, to make those lights work better, to make that machine much more productive and efficient. That's kingdom work, whether Christians are doing it or not.
And Paul, you talk about the church, and I think I know at least one of your responses to this question, but would you clarify what you mean by the church when you use that word?
Well, the church is if we think in terms of the church we go to, that's going to be the gathered, the local body of gathered saints. Mm-hmm. Christ used the word ecclesia. Now, ecclesia is not a religious word. Ecclesia was a word used by Greeks to talk about the assembly, okay? A city-state might have a mayor, and he might have an agenda, but if he can't get the key families along for the ride, that was kind of the assembly. If he can't get them to go along, nothing happened. Now, Jesus lived in a time of Roman occupation. Rome was annexing all of the towns and cities around them. They would go into a place and annex it. Well, that means they would conquer it. And interestingly enough, they would leave military people there, and there would be official representatives of the Roman government, but they also would gather a bunch of families, Roman families, called an ecclesia. And those families would move into that town, and they didn't have any official capacity except their job was to model what it was like to be part of Rome. This is how we do business. This is how we make agreements. This is how we settle disputes. They were modeling that. In a way, they were like an ambassador of the best of Rome. Well, isn't that what the church is? They're ambassadors. It's like an example of what it looks like to live kingdomly.
So when Peter recognized Jesus as Savior, and Jesus said to him, "On this rock I'll build my church," that church, in my mind, is still the things you've just discussed. But it is, maybe I should add what I understand it not to be, which is part of my question, and that's the building, the institution, you talk about fundraising, right? There's not a P&L, but the cash flow, right? So it's not those things. And yet it's easy to confuse. And so I'm glad we could touch on this. You talked about a mission mindset or a kingdom mindset. You talked about a little bit. We haven't really gone into serving. You asked me a question about that, but we have talked about what it is to have a kingdom mindset and to do kingdom work. And so this has been a really good, I think, baseline for some of the other stewardship conversations we can have in terms of how we do life day to day, how we make decisions. What are the things that are truly important? What are we here for? So I'll leave open any extra comments and time for that you might want to add on, Paul. But I just want to thank you for this baseline that we've created today.
Yeah, and when you say kingdom work, it's maybe less of a task to find out what your kingdom work is. Maybe the important thing is to define in what way the work you do is kingdom work. Okay?
So what I'm already doing.
Yes.
Okay.
How would I define what I'm doing in terms of the kingdom? Now, we can help people with that, but if you can't, maybe you got to find some other work.
Okay.
How's that?
Sure. And boy, let's unpack this a little bit more in future sessions together, and that would be specifically purposeful work, missional work, work that is intentional, right? So let's come back to some of those topics in a future session or sessions. In the meantime, I do want to thank you again, Paul, for joining us. It's been such a pleasure to have you on. This has been a really refreshing session for me to get to re-engage with Paul Larsen, but to dive a little bit more into some of these topics about what it is to live a wise life. How about that? And so with that, it's been such a pleasure to be back. I hope this session has been a benefit to you and others you decide to share it with. We invite you to interact with us on Apple, Spotify, SoundCloud, even social media. You can also visit our hosted podcast page and schedule with our sponsor, Fidear Advisors, at astewardsview.com. From all of us at A Steward's View, we look forward to connecting with you again soon. Until then, please do be wise and decide well.
You've been listening to A Steward's View. To learn more about Fidear Advisors or speak with Aaron, visit fidearadvice.com. That's FIDERE advice.com. To listen to this and other episodes of A Steward's View, visit astewardsview.com. A Steward's View is brought to you by Fidear Advisors, a registered investment advisor offering financial planning and asset aggregation. Asset aggregation systems are designed to align portfolios across accounts into a single, globally optimized investment plan for families it serves. Fidear maintains liquidity of client capital at major custodians and utilizes asset managers that have shown consistent historical performance through excellent risk management. This program is not an offer to transact any securities and does not constitute a financial planning engagement. Information provided has been prepared from sources believed to be reliable, but is not guaranteed and does not represent all available data necessary for making financial decisions and is for informational purposes only. Fidare and its representatives do not offer tax or legal advice through Fidare. Please consult the appropriate advisor. Fidare Advisors LLC is a registered investment advisor. To discuss your situation or to learn more about Fidare, please visit fidareadvice.com. That's FIDERE advice.com.